The fluorescent lights of O'Hare International Airport cast harsh shadows across Michael Brown's face as he made his way through Terminal 5. His polished Oxford shoes clicked against the tile floor, echoing through the bustling corridor. The briefcase in his right hand contained items from his diplomatic mission in Nigeria, personal effects and small gifts from his hosts. Michael adjusted his navy suit jacket, feeling the weight of jet lag after the 14-hour flight. Despite his exhaustion, a sense of accomplishment lifted his spirits. The meetings had gone well, and he looked forward to returning home. At 52, Michael had spent 2 decades building bridges between nations, earning respect from colleagues worldwide. As he approached the customs checkpoint, Michael noticed 2 TSA officers watching him intently. Officer Sarah Collins, a stern-faced woman in her mid-30s, whispered something to her partner, Officer David Thompson, a stocky man with close-cropped hair. Their body language shifted noticeably as Michael drew closer. "Sir, step aside for additional screening," Collins barked, her hand resting on her holstered weapon. The abrupt command drew curious glances from nearby travelers. Michael maintained his composure, reaching for his diplomatic credentials. "Officers, I'm Ambassador Michael Brown, returning from—" "I said step aside," Thompson interrupted, positioning himself to block Michael's path. His aggressive tone carried through the terminal, causing more heads to turn. "Put the briefcase down slowly." Michael's diplomatic training kicked in as he attempted to de-escalate the situation. "I understand you're doing your job, but I have diplomatic immunity and proper credentials right here." He moved his hand slowly toward his inside pocket. "Stop moving," Collins shouted, drawing more attention. Her hand tightened on her weapon. "Keep your hands where we can see them." A crowd began to form around them, creating a semicircle of onlookers. Some pulled out phones, while others whispered among themselves. The air grew thick with tension as more passengers stopped to watch the scene unfold. "Listen carefully," Thompson said, stepping closer to Michael. "We've received intelligence about contraband moving through this terminal. Your profile matches our suspect." Michael's jaw tightened, understanding exactly what Thompson meant by profile. Years of similar experiences flashed through his mind, but this time felt different. The officer's aggressive stance, the growing crowd, and the implications of their words created a powder keg atmosphere. Murmurs rippled through the gathering crowd. An elderly woman clutched her purse tighter, while a businessman in a suit shook his head disapprovingly at the officers. A mother pulled her children closer, covering their eyes as if expecting violence to erupt at any moment. "Officers," Michael said, his voice steady but firm, "I'm going to reach for my diplomatic identification very slowly. Everything you need to verify my identity is right here." He maintained eye contact with Collins, hoping to convey his professionalism and composure despite the humiliating situation. Ana Torres gripped her phone tighter, her journalism instincts kicking in as she watched the scene unfold from her seat near Gate B-15. She'd been waiting for her connecting flight to New York, where she was supposed to start her internship at a major news network. Instead of reviewing her notes, she found herself witness to what looked like textbook racial profiling. Without hesitation, she opened her camera app and started recording. Her hands trembled slightly, but she steadied them against her knee, making sure to capture every detail of the interaction. The fluorescent airport lighting created perfect visibility, and the gathered crowd provided context to the severity of the situation. "He's not doing anything wrong," she heard someone mutter nearby. The comment came from John Mitchell, a tall man in his late 50s wearing a police veteran's cap. He stood a few feet away, his weathered face creased with concern. Anna noticed his fists clenching and unclenching as he watched the scene. Officer David Thompson's next move made Anna's stomach turn. As Ambassador Brown attempted to reach for his identification, Thompson stepped forward and shoved him backward. The push wasn't hard enough to knock the ambassador down, but it was clearly intended to assert dominance. The crowd gasped collectively. "I said don't move," Thompson barked, while Officer Collins maintained her position, hands still on her weapon. The ambassador stumbled slightly but kept his balance, his dignity intact despite the humiliation. John Mitchell took a half step forward, then stopped. Anna's camera caught his internal struggle playing across his face. 27 years on the force had taught him the complexities of law enforcement, but this situation struck him as plainly wrong. He'd seen similar scenarios play out countless times, and they rarely ended well. Anna zoomed in on Officer Collins's name badge, making sure it was clearly visible in the frame. Her journalism professor's words echoed in her mind, documentation is power. She'd covered protests and civil rights rallies for her college newspaper, but this felt different. This was raw, unfolding right in front of her. The trembling in her hands grew worse as she realized the potential implications of what she was recording. Her Puerto Rican parents had always taught her to keep her head down, stay out of trouble. But they'd also taught her about justice, about standing up for what's right. John Mitchell finally spoke up, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "Officers, you might want to let the man show his credentials." But Collins shot him a warning look, and Thompson didn't even acknowledge the comment. Anna's phone showed she'd been recording for 3 minutes now. The crowd had grown larger, and she could hear people making calls, presumably to supervisors, to media, to anyone who might listen. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The contrast between Ambassador Brown's composed demeanor and the officer's aggressive stance made for compelling footage. Anna knew this was more than just another viral video. This was evidence of something systemic, something that needed to be exposed. The terminal erupted into a cacophony of voices as passengers took sides. A businessman in an expensive suit stepped forward. "This is ridiculous. Let him show his ID." His outburst encouraged others, and soon multiple voices joined in protest. "They're just doing their jobs," countered a woman clutching her designer handbag. "If he has nothing to hide, why doesn't he just comply?" Her comment sparked immediate backlash from nearby observers, turning the crowd into a volatile mix of opposing viewpoints. Ana Torres pushed through the crowd, her phone still recording. "Excuse me, officers," she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm a journalist." "Don't you think?" Officer Collins cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Step back, or you'll be detained for interfering with an official investigation," Collins snapped, her attention divided between Anna and Ambassador Brown. The threat hung in the air, heavy and explicit. Ambassador Brown remained still, his hands visible, but his patience was wearing thin. Decades of diplomatic training hadn't prepared him for being treated like a common criminal in his own country. Sweat began to bead on his forehead under the harsh airport lights. "This is a violation of diplomatic immunity," he stated firmly, addressing not just the officers but the crowd around them. "And more importantly, it's a clear case of racial profiling." His words caused another surge of murmurs through the gathering. Thompson stepped closer, his body language increasingly aggressive. "Sir, diplomatic immunity doesn't exempt you from security screening. Last warning, put the briefcase down and step away." John Mitchell moved closer to Anna, positioning himself between her and the officers. His presence provided a buffer, allowing her to continue recording while staying just out of Collins's reach. His police experience told him this situation was rapidly approaching a breaking point. The crowd had swollen to nearly 50 people now, with more airport passengers stopping to witness the confrontation. Phones were raised everywhere, capturing the scene from multiple angles. The air felt electric with tension, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. "I've already offered to show you my credentials," Ambassador Brown repeated, his voice remaining measured but firm. "Your approach is not only unprofessional but potentially illegal." His words carried the weight of someone who understood both law and protocol. A young mother with 2 children spoke up from the crowd, "My kids are watching this. Is this what we're teaching them about law enforcement?" Her comment struck a nerve, causing several onlookers to nod in agreement. The situation had transformed from a simple security check into a public referendum on police behavior. Every word, every gesture now carried added weight as the crowd grew more invested in the outcome. The terminal's regular bustle had come to a complete halt, all attention focused on this increasingly volatile standoff. 3 airport security officers pushed through the crowd, their blue uniforms distinct from Thompson and Collins's TSA gear. The lead officer, Captain Rodriguez, assessed the scene quickly, his experienced eyes taking in the raised phones, the tense officers, and Ambassador Brown's controlled demeanor. "What's the situation here?" Rodriguez asked, positioning himself between Brown and the TSA officers. His presence created a momentary pause in the confrontation, though Collins and Thompson remained rigid in their defensive stances. Ambassador Brown seized the opportunity. "I'm a U.S. diplomat returning from Nigeria. These officers have refused to let me present my credentials and have threatened me with physical force." His voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd been through this too many times before. Anna's video continued rolling as she captured Rodriguez's reaction. The footage showed him glancing at Collins and Thompson with barely concealed disapproval. Online, her initial clips were already gaining traction. Notifications buzzed continuously on her phone as the video spread across social media platforms. "This is going viral," someone in the crowd announced, holding up their phone. "It's already got thousands of shares." The news seemed to unsettle Thompson, whose aggressive posture slightly deflated. Collins, however, doubled down. "We received credible intelligence about contraband," she insisted, addressing Rodriguez. "The suspect matches the description," she stopped abruptly, realizing how her words sounded in the context. John Mitchell stepped forward. "I watched this whole thing unfold. These officers profiled this gentleman from the moment he walked up. His police background lent weight to his words. In my 27 years on the force, this is exactly the kind of behavior that destroys public trust." Rodriguez turned to Ambassador Brown. "Sir, may I see your credentials?" The simple courtesy of his request highlighted how badly Collins and Thompson had mishandled the situation. As Brown reached slowly for his diplomatic passport and ID, the crowd went silent. He produced both items with deliberate movements, handing them to Rodriguez. The captain examined them briefly, his expression darkening. "Officers Collins and Thompson, step aside," Rodriguez ordered. "Ambassador Brown, I apologize for this incident. You're free to proceed." The words were professional, but the damage was done. Ambassador Brown straightened his jacket, his dignity intact but his spirit wounded. "I expect a full report will be filed about this incident," he said, his diplomatic training evident in every measured word. "This isn't over." Anna stopped recording but quickly backed up the video to multiple cloud services. Her hands shook as she realized the magnitude of what she'd captured. A quick check of social media showed her video was already being picked up by major news outlets. Within hours, Anna's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Major news networks competed for exclusive rights to her footage. She sat in her small apartment, having cancelled her New York plans, watching her video play on CNN, Fox, and MSNBC simultaneously. Her journalism professors hadn't prepared her for this level of attention. "What made you decide to record?" Anderson Cooper asked during her first live interview. Anna sat in the local CNN affiliate studio, trying to keep her voice steady under the bright lights. "It was instinct. As a journalist, we're taught to document injustice when we see it. But as a person of color, I knew what I was watching was wrong." Her response resonated with viewers, making her an overnight symbol of citizen journalism. Meanwhile, Ambassador Brown faced a wall of microphones outside his Washington, D.C. office. "What happened to me happens to countless others every day," he stated, his diplomatic polish giving weight to every word. "The only difference is that mine was caught on camera." The State Department issued a formal complaint to the Department of Homeland Security. Inside their offices, officials scrambled to contain the growing public relations disaster. The TSA launched an internal investigation, placing Collins and Thompson on administrative leave. Social media exploded with hashtags, #DiplomaticWhileBlack, #TravelingWhileBlack, and #TSA Profiler trended nationwide. Every major civil rights organization issued statements, and protests began forming outside O'Hare International Airport. Ambassador Brown's decades of diplomatic service became public knowledge. His record of negotiating peace treaties, his Harvard education, his military service, all splashed across news channels. Each detail made the TSA officers' actions look worse. "This isn't about my credentials," Brown insisted during a powerful interview with Trevor Noah. "This is about basic human dignity. What about the thousands of other travelers who don't have diplomatic immunity to protect them?" Anna found herself thrust into the role of advocacy journalist. Her social media followers grew from a few hundred to 500,000 in days. Every major journalism school in the country offered her internships, but she chose to stay focused on this story. "The video speaks for itself," she told Rachel Maddow. "What we're seeing is systematic bias played out in real time." Officer Collins and Thompson weren't just having a bad day, they were following ingrained patterns of behavior. The TSA's Internal Affairs Department moved with unprecedented speed, scheduling interviews with everyone involved. Security camera footage from multiple angles emerged, corroborating Anna's video and revealing even more details about the officer's aggressive behavior. Outside O'Hare Airport, Anna stood before a crowd of 2,000 protesters. Signs bearing Ambassador Brown's image and anti-discrimination slogans filled the air. She'd organized this rally through social media, but the turnout exceeded her expectations. "We're not just here about one incident," she spoke into the megaphone, her voice carrying across the crowd. "We're here because this happens every day, to countless travelers, who don't have the protection of diplomatic status or viral videos." Ambassador Brown surprised everyone by appearing at the protest. He walked through the crowd in a casual sweater and jeans, shaking hands, listening to stories. Each person who approached him shared similar experiences of profiling at security checkpoints. "Your courage in coming forward has given others the strength to speak up," a young man told him, tears in his eyes. Brown embraced him, the moment captured by dozens of cameras and shared thousands of times online. The airport police handled the protest differently than the original incident. Officers maintained a respectful distance, their body cameras prominently displayed. Captain Rodriguez himself oversaw the security detail, ensuring his officers followed proper protocols. Inside the airport, current TSA officers wore pins reading, "Not in our name," a silent protest against Collins and Thompson's actions. The internal investigation had revealed a pattern. Other officers began coming forward with stories about similar incidents they'd witnessed. It wasn't just those two officers, a whistleblower told Anna in an exclusive interview. "There's an unwritten culture of profiling. We need systemic change." The interview went viral, forcing TSA leadership to address deeper institutional issues. Security camera footage from the past 6 months was reviewed. Patterns emerged: minorities faced additional screening at higher rates, were more likely to be pulled aside, more likely to face aggressive questioning. The data couldn't be ignored. During the protest, John Mitchell, the retired police officer who witnessed the original incident, took the microphone. "I stayed silent too many times during my career," he admitted. "Watching that young woman record while I hesitated, it showed me that times have changed. We all have a responsibility now." Anna's protest coverage caught the attention of major news organizations. But instead of focusing on career opportunities, she launched her own YouTube channel dedicated to documenting similar incidents and promoting accountability in law enforcement. The crowd outside O'Hare grew larger as the day progressed. What started as a local protest became a national movement. People shared their own airport security horror stories using hashtags Anna had created, building a database of incidents that couldn't be dismissed. Ambassador Brown stood at the podium in Harvard Law School's auditorium, facing a packed room of law students, civil rights activists, and media representatives. His speech, titled "Dignity at the Checkpoint," had become the centerpiece of a national conference on discrimination in transportation security. "When those officers stopped me, they didn't see my degrees, my service record, or my diplomatic status," he stated, his voice firm. "They saw what they wanted to see, a threat that existed only in their minds. Today, we're here to change those minds." In the audience, Anna sat taking notes, no longer just a witness but now a key speaker at the conference. Her documentary series on transportation security practices had garnered millions of views. She'd transformed from a student journalist into a respected voice on civil rights issues. The video wasn't just about exposing one incident, Anna explained during her presentation. She played clips showing similar incidents from across the country. It was about exposing a pattern. Each of these clips tells the same story: different airports, different officers, same prejudices. The conference took an unexpected turn when Sarah Collins requested to speak. Her hands shaking as she approached the microphone during the Q&A session, she seemed smaller without her uniform and authority. "I want to explain my actions that day," she began, her voice trembling. But the audience's reaction was immediate and hostile. Some stood and turned their backs to her. Others walked out. The remaining attendees listened in cold silence. "I was trained to look for certain patterns," Collins continued, struggling to justify her actions. "But watching that video, seeing myself through others' eyes, I didn't recognize the person I'd become." Her words fell flat against the weight of her actions. Meanwhile, dozens more videos emerged of Collins and Thompson's previous encounters with minority travelers. Each clip added to the growing evidence of systematic discrimination. Their personnel files, obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests, revealed multiple complaints that had been dismissed or buried. Anna's latest investigation revealed something even more disturbing: internal TSA training materials that seemed to encourage racial profiling without explicitly stating it. The documents used coded language and behavioral indicators that disproportionately targeted minorities. These aren't just guidelines, Anna explained to her growing online audience. They're written justifications for prejudice. They give officers like Collins and Thompson permission to act on their biases while claiming they're following protocol. The federal courthouse in Chicago buzzed with tension as James Anderson, TSA's regional supervisor, faced the oversight committee. The hearing room was packed, with Ambassador Brown and Anna sitting in the front row, their presence a stark reminder of why they were all there. Can you explain how officers under your supervision consistently showed patterns of discriminatory behavior? The committee chairwoman's question cut through the formal atmosphere. Anderson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Our officers follow strict protocols, he began, but was quickly interrupted by Representative Martinez, who held up a stack of incident reports. Then explain why minority travelers are 6 times more likely to face aggressive screening under your leadership. From her seat, Anna live tweeted the proceedings, her followers growing by the thousands as she provided real-time context to Anderson's increasingly problematic responses. Her presence made the TSA officials visibly uncomfortable. They'd learned the power of her documentation. The evidence mounted: internal emails showing casual racism, training materials with coded biases, statistics revealing clear patterns of discrimination. Each revelation caused gasps in the hearing room. Ambassador Brown remained stoic, but his eyes never left Anderson's face. A junior TSA officer turned whistleblower testified next. Supervisor Anderson told us to use our instincts, she revealed. But he made it clear what he meant by instincts. It was understood that certain travelers required more scrutiny than others. The testimony grew more damning as the day progressed. Security footage showed Anderson personally instructing officers on profile-based screening methods. His attempts to defend these as standard procedure only highlighted the systemic nature of the problem. Michael and Anna exchanged glances as more evidence emerged. This had grown far beyond one incident in Chicago. They were witnessing the unraveling of decades of institutional bias, all because one student journalist decided to press record. This hearing isn't just about what happened to me, Ambassador Brown whispered to Anna during a break. It's about every person who ever walked through an airport feeling less than human because of someone's prejudice. The committee members stared down at Anderson as he fumbled through explanations. His career, spanning 25 years, was crumbling under the weight of evidence that could no longer be ignored or explained away. The national media circus around the trial transformed the courthouse steps into a public forum. Protesters carried signs with Ambassador Brown's airport photo alongside historical civil rights images, drawing powerful parallels that couldn't be ignored. Sarah Collins sat in her lawyer's office, watching her career implode on every news channel. Her hands shook as she read through social media comments. Someone had leaked her address online, and the hate mail was piling up. The pressure had begun to crack her practiced demeanor. "I can't take this anymore," she told her attorney, her voice breaking. "Everyone thinks I'm a monster, but I was just following what I was taught." Her defensive stance had crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny and mounting evidence. David Thompson took a different approach. In a surprise move, he requested a separate hearing, planning to distance himself from Collins. Officer Collins was the senior officer, his statement read. She made the call to approach Ambassador Brown. I was following her lead. This betrayal sent Collins into a spiral. "He's lying," she screamed at her lawyer. "We both saw the alert about suspicious travelers from African countries. He's the one who said we should stop him." Her outburst was overheard by a paralegal, who promptly leaked it to Anna. The rift between the officers created new headlines. Anna's latest article, Partners in Prejudice: How Airport Security Culture Breeds Discrimination, went viral. It detailed how the partnership between Collins and Thompson represented a larger systemic problem. Internal TSA documents revealed that Collins and Thompson had been partnered specifically because they had similar screening statistics, a euphemism for their high rate of stopping minority travelers. The implications were damning for TSA leadership. More officers began speaking out. A female Muslim officer described how Collins and Thompson regularly selected Middle Eastern and African travelers for extra screening, even when they triggered no alerts. A black TSA agent revealed how they'd been pressured to participate in discriminatory practices to fit in. During a particularly tense day of testimony, Collins finally broke down. "We were trained to look for certain things," she sobbed. "But nobody ever said it out loud. It was all coded language and nods and, you know what to look for. And if you didn't play along, you were labeled as not being a team player. The courthouse became a pressure cooker of emotions, revelations, and consequences. Each day brought new evidence of how deep the discrimination ran, how many lives had been affected, and how many careers would be destroyed in the aftermath. The verdict came down like a thunderclap in the packed courtroom. In the matter of discriminatory practices and abuse of power, this court finds officers Sarah Collins and David Thompson guilty on all counts. The judge's words echoed through the silent room. But the real bombshell came next. Furthermore, the court finds sufficient evidence of institutional negligence and systematic discrimination within the TSA's training and oversight protocols. The judge's announcement triggered gasps throughout the courtroom. Sarah Collins slumped in her chair as the judge continued reading. Beyond termination, she faced civil penalties and mandatory anti-bias training. But the biggest shock came from the evidence found on her personal devices, years of text messages and emails revealing a coordinated network of officers who shared discriminatory practices across multiple airports. Anna, sitting beside Ambassador Brown, frantically typed on her laptop. Her final piece, The Fall of Airport Security's Hidden Bias Ring, would later win her a Pulitzer Prize. The story revealed how Collins had been part of an unofficial group of TSA officers who specifically targeted minorities and shared success stories through encrypted messages. Ambassador Brown received an unexpected call from the White House. "We want you to head a new commission on transportation security reform," the chief of staff explained. "Your experience and handling of this situation make you uniquely qualified to rebuild public trust." The final revelation stunned everyone. During the investigation, authorities discovered that while Collins and Thompson were harassing Ambassador Brown, actual drug smugglers had passed through another checkpoint. Their fixation on profiling had actively compromised airport security. In the aftermath, Anna received offers from every major news network but chose instead to establish an independent watchdog organization focused on transportation security accountability. Her first hire: John Mitchell, the retired police officer who'd witnessed the original incident. The TSA underwent a complete overhaul. New training protocols were established, emphasizing data-driven screening methods rather than officer intuition. Body cameras became mandatory for all TSA officers, with footage regularly reviewed by civilian oversight committees. Ambassador Brown's final public statement captured the moment perfectly. This case wasn't just about two officers or one incident. It was about confronting the quiet bias that poisoned our system. Today's verdict isn't the end, it's a beginning. Real security comes from justice, not prejudice. The story concluded where it began, at O'Hare International Airport. But this time, Ambassador Brown walked through security under the watch of newly trained officers, past walls displaying the new Passenger Bill of Rights, and under cameras that now streamed to public oversight boards. One person's dignity had transformed an entire system. The real victory wasn't just in the courtroom, it was in the thousands of travelers who would never know what it felt like to be humiliated because of their appearance. Anna's simple act of recording had triggered a cascade that reshaped American aviation security, proving that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest actions.